Leadership is about meeting with your people and hearing them. We want that free flow of information. We don't want people to be guarding. We want them to use all their ideas, brainstorm as best they can, and throw out the ones that don't work. You do not want to stifle creativity because there will always be someone who's smarter than you.
Hello, this is Ryan Connell with Chief Digital Artificial Intelligence Office, joined today with General Treviño. General, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Ryan. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, excited to dive in. You wanted to start, give a quick overview of who you are and what you do?
Sure. Major General Alice Treviño. I am the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Contracting in the Department of the Air Force. I'm also the Senior Procurement Executive designee on behalf of my boss, Honorable Hunter, who is the Senior Acquisition Executive. And then I have the SAF AQC role, so I'm the head of the contracting activity as well. So triple-hatted, but all things contracting and acquisition, and stationed at the Pentagon. And I just, have about 32 years in the Air Force. And I think we first met when we were a Defense Contract Management Agency together and kind of crossed paths there. So it's great to be with you in this forum as well, Ryan.
Yeah, yes, ma'am. Appreciate that. 32 years, it's incredible. Appreciate your service. Help the listeners understand, how did you get here? What was that path like?
So the path has been a lot of branches and sequels. And I grew up in Evansville, Indiana. I joined I applied to go to the Air Force Academy and got accepted. And this is around 1989. I was a management degree major. And after I graduated in 1993, I got my assignment in contracting. Funny story. As a management major, they make you fill out a wish list. And I put down anything that had the word management in it. So I put program management, contract management, financial management, operations management, information management, and I ended up getting contracting management. I didn't really know what it was. A lot of people have a difficult time explaining what contracting is, but I have learned to understand that we all do contracting in one way, shape, or another. We buy things every day. We could do lowest price at Amazon, or we could do more technical things where we're buying, higher, more expensive items like computers or houses or cars. And so I just really love the field of procurement and learning more about acquisition. After I graduated from the Air Force Academy, my first assignment was in systems, which is a little bit rare. They usually put second lieutenants in operational acquisition, operational contracting. So you're at the installation level, learning more things that you buy to outfit offices and organizations and services and commodities. But I went into systems in my first assignment, and I learned about, we used to have telephone switches. And so instead of today, you get signals and satellites everywhere. Back then you had a telephone switch on the base, and we would buy the base digital switches. So each base, you had to buy a BDS system to be able to have the operator on the base give you a signal at your desk if your desk had a computer at the time or had a telephone at the time. So that was my first foray into systems and understanding. We actually transitioned from individual bases to regional base construct, and that was novel at the time, like buying base communications and telecommunications access to more than one installation at a time, which is kind of funny now as you think about it. But
yeah, for sure.
Had a couple of assignments. Yeah, I know, right? I was like, they even had a museum, they had the telephone operators, the BDS switches. And I was like, this is very rare. But I've had about 17 assignments since then. And so how did I get here? Again, I must say it's branches and sequels, luck, serendipity, and just trying to do my best and performing the best that I could. And I've always loved in the Air Force. At that time, of course, the Space Force didn't exist, but the Air and Space Force exists now. Even when I was a second lieutenant, just being a part of a team, working on a mission together, being able to accomplish that. And then, of course, at the end of the road, after you would either have a successful contract or a successful award or a successful, you fill in the blank, getting more responsibility on top of that, having a bigger team. And I learned about systems and operational and enterprise contracting over the last over 31 years. And I've done some joint assignments. So I've been at Transportation Command. I've worked for the Deputy Secretary of Defense. I was a principal military assistant in that job. And I've had multiple overseas deployments, including a year in Afghanistan as the senior contracting official. So, everything in the Air Force and comes full circle. Everything, as we do comes full circle. So when I was a senior contracting official in Afghanistan, now I'm an HCA and I have 26, 27 senior contracting officials that get their acquisition authority for me. And I remember when I was a SCO in 2013, at the beginning, I was like, what does a SCO do? Reading my authorities letter
Sure.
that the HCA gave me. And now, it's like you earn or you reap what you sow. So if you made it confusing for your SCOs, now you have to make it less confusing because now you're the person that sends out the authorities.
Yeah, and running through all of the things that are delegated, and is that delegated or not? And it can get a little complex for sure.
Yes, we have a matrix now, and that's one of the complexities of being in contracting. Do I have the authority to do this or not? Does this have to go to a higher level? I can't tell you how many times we've been asked by both the Secretary of the Air Force, Secretary Kendall, and my boss, Honorable Hunter, like, well, why can't that be delegated? And making sure that we trace the regulation and the statute all the way up to make sure whether or not, did someone read this wrong? Can we delegate, or is it non-delegable?
Sure. Do you have a thought there? Like do you have a position on your delegations in terms of like it's normal that you delegate things or you like to retain things? I'm just curious.
So it's normal that we delegate, and then the only time we usually take back a delegation is usually when it's a high visibility program. And so I've had, even in the last year, I would say I've had to bring up some authorities to my level just so that I had the insight, because the program itself was so highly visible, even in terms of sometimes it's all the way up to doctrinal plant in OSD, acquisition and sustainment. And so if you didn't pull it up to have the awareness, so it wasn't necessarily that we didn't trust the team. And that's why we do have our delegations, is we trust the team. They're educated, they're trained, they're proficient, they can take that on. This was more about having the awareness and visibility so I could provide the team top cover and make sure that I was the face to the decision maker that was at a higher authority versus going straight down. And then we would bring in the procuring contracting officer to make sure that the PCO was still the one who was signing, the award documentation or executing a certain modification, but that I had the awareness and then would give them clearance to do what they would normally do, or I would normally delegate to a more junior or senior contracting official. So it's about awareness and transparency and visibility and making sure that we're taking care of our senior leaders on some of these very high visibility programs. And it doesn't even have to do with money, right? Sometimes it's that visibility that's needed on some of these, special programs.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's funny because like I feel like the default is that matrix or like that those delegations are dollar based, but to your point, there are things that are just high visibility for whatever reason if they're not high dollars. It's just a good point. Interesting.
Yeah, it's a funny story on that. When I was in Afghanistan as a SCO, it was New Year's Eve, and we had a contract, and it was for our protective service agents, and personal security detachment, that detail. So the personal security detachment had up armored vehicles, and those vehicles were used to transport the 4-star in theater. And it was General Dunford at the time. And that contract expired on the 31st of December. And what had happened was they had a transportation monitor in theater who had gone home on R&R, and then the acting didn't know that they should have pulled the vehicles back to rotate them out so that they had the new vehicles that were ready to start on 1 January without any, delays or turnover issues. And they forgot the 4-stars vehicles. And so on the 31st of December, we were knocking on the HCA's hooch on his door to say, sir, you need to allow this, to go through. We needed your concurrence. And I remember at the time thinking, this is so silly. It was it was like $120,000 contract. But if he didn't know, why, and he was granting that approval to expediently, we ended up going back to the original contractor and having the authority that they agreed to the terms and conditions that we could then have the vehicles for an extra week while we did a responsible turnover of those new vehicles. We got all the numbers down and everything. If, they agreed to it, we weren't doing it unilaterally, so it was bilateral modification. And if he didn't have awareness, I can imagine, like, he comes in the next day, Happy New Year, goes to his staff meeting, and the 2-star, the DCS general says, hey, the 4-star doesn't have vehicles, and none the wiser. So sometimes those things are there to give us that visibility and protect ourselves, but it's really, it's that information flow. And just so, again, that you have that top cover and awareness. And it's not about, not trusting somebody to negotiate for rental vehicles. It's understanding the strategic consequences of, and the mission that maybe a simple commodity or a simple item really, how important it really is to the overarching performance of a unit.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, as I've kind of matured in my career, I have my experiences of what my day to day looks like, but I have no level of understanding of what someone in your capacity, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Contracting, like what your day to day actually looks like. Is it just every minute's counted for, meetings, dealing with administration, dealing with contracts? I'd love to just hear from your perspective, day to day.
Yeah, I don't even know if there's a normal day, Ryan. I really don't know. I mean, every day we look at the calendar a couple times a week, and I have a calendar sync with my deputy, Mr. Scott Callisti, and our executive staff. And I actually open my calendar up to my division chiefs because it changes so much. And it's, so we have what we want to do, and which are the meetings that we control. And then you have the meetings, that your boss controls. And so they sometimes don't have, the ability to deconflict. So, if you look at the calendar at 1,600 hours, 1,700 hours the night before, on average, I would say you can expect a couple pop-ups. So my executive officer, Lieutenant Colonel Lori Romero, she laughs a lot. She'll say, we had it perfect, and it just blew up. and so it's kind of like calendar roulette.
Sure.
Every day. And, but a typical, I would say like a typical month, what I try to do, and I learned this from when I worked for the Deputy Secretary of Defense at the time, Secretary Shanahan. He had color coding. And so I color code I learned that from him and his executive office. I color code my meetings by who's the principal at the meeting. Is it Is it a DoD, OSD level meeting or, outside agency? Is it a internal Secretary of the Air Force meeting or under Secretary of the Air Force meeting? Is it my boss's meeting? So it's a SAF AQ meeting, and then my own internal meetings, and then trying to decide, is it a follow-up meeting? Is it admin time, like you said? And I try to be deliberate. I don't always succeed, but I try to be deliberate about making sure that we can end 5 minutes early. And we really try, because then we give people back a 5-minute brain break. So my meetings, I try to give back 5 minutes. I'm not always successful, but that's the goal, so that we can connect on a personal level, or that people have time in between meetings, just to decompress and mentally change to the next meeting. But you feel very value added because the calendar is full, and you have to be intentional about getting those brain breaks in for yourself and for your staff, and because then they can bounce back. And then allowing some grace and sensitivity for the pop-ups, because they will happen. And then I would say the two most important things that I look for on a month is that I give time for mentoring. And so I want to always have space on my calendar for mentoring officers, enlisted civilians that come to me and ask for, it could be a one-time, or it could be an informal mentoring, or it could just be, one-on-one, and we never have a follow-up. I always want to leave space for our industry counterparts, and I work those very closely with our action officers to make sure, because if somebody from industry reaches out to me, I will make sure that members of my staff are the action officers, and they can reach out to them and say, okay, what questions are we going to go over? We want to make very good use of your time. And I have learned in this position as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Contracting, if someone asks you for a meeting, you do your homework beforehand. But if you say yes to one, you have to say yes to all. And so that is I've learned that, you want to be, make sure that you are available and you're fair to all parties. So we just be very mindful of that. And then the other thing that I like to do, throughout the day, so I say kind of like big picture month, I want to make sure I have a lot of time for mentoring and then our industry counterpart engagements. But daily, I try to put some reflection time on there. So if I can, it's not just like going through an email or reading your email, but trying to do some big picture thinking, reflective time on, what I call, and learned from another former boss when I was at Transportation Command, Rear Admiral Harnachek, who retired as a vice admiral. But he taught me about big rocks. And so kind of really understanding what your big rocks are for the day. And so if you know what your top 2 or 3 big rocks are for the day, you have to spend some time on it and reflect on it. You can't just, those are the strategic things. They're not just the day-to-day tactical tasks. And so I try to put time on my calendar for that and really guard it, because if you don't have reflection time, you can't do the big things, right? You'll just be overcome by events, and your calendar will take over your life.
Yeah, I know that feeling all too well. I have it's not as elegant as how you put it, but I have a 2-hour window, I think once a month. And how often I give that up for something that I regret giving it up is far too often. So I got to be more diligent there. No, I appreciate
it. It is hard. It's so hard. Yeah, that discipline, and it's because that whoever's asking for you when you give it up, that's important too.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very what we kind of started 2 years ago when I came into the role was about alignment, prioritization, and simplification. And that middle piece of prioritization, that helps a lot. Are you working on your urgent priorities? Are you working on your important? They're important, but maybe they're not urgent. And really understanding the difference between those.
I wanted to dive into the flight plan, but I guess before I even ask the question, the flight plan's still a thing, right? I'm not an Air Force employee, so I don't even know.
Yes, it's still a thing. February of 24, we released our 2024.
Okay.
And so we're getting ready to go in. We came out of our board of directors meeting in August, and notionally talked about our flight plan, and then we'll snap the chalk line in December, and then we'll release our new flight plan in February of 25.
Got it. Is tools not rules still an element?
Tools not rules is still in there.
I love it.
Our contracting officers, buyers, they need tools.
Yeah. So obviously, me being with CDAO and specifically trying to build tools and vehicles for the acquisition workforce. Curious, your perspective, what you've been doing in that area, if there are tools for the contracting community, all of those things.
Yeah. So this year, actually, it started leading up in 2023, and then 2024 we more codified it and got a little bit more formality. And in 23, you've probably heard this analogy. If not, I'll share it. It's kind of like the difference. If you want to disseminate tools at scale, how do you do that, right? How do you know that make everybody have awareness? Do they have the visibility of it? Do they understand how to use it? And so what we realize, and what I kind of realize is this, to scale, there's only two ways to scale. And it's the chef or the recipe. And so I think for far too long, the easy button is the chef. We all want to be that premier chef, or we know celebrity chefs, and they don't often write down their recipes. And to scale across the Department of the Air Force contracting enterprise, we need some of the recipes written down, because it's much nicer to follow a recipe, to know what your ingredients are. And then, of course, I talk about chocolate chip cookies. Everybody has a recipe for chocolate chip cookies, and you could tailor them. And so what we had found in 23 was there was a lot of pockets of chefs out there that were moving really fast in tools and demanding, not just artificial intelligence tools, and then we had robotic process automation with our bots, and then people wanting to dive into machine learning, and then won't go too far down that, but like, which GPT models do you use, and what's available out there, and everybody was kind of going off in a different direction. One of my former bosses, General Bunch, when he was the Air Force Material Commander, he called this the Wild Wild West. And I would say, this is the Wild Wild West. And so what we did was to try to make sure that it wasn't we still want, innovation, and we still want creativity, and we love and need tailorability because we're so unique. We need to push boundaries, and we need to try things different. But we needed to have one-stop place where people could find these tools. And so in 24, we created our digital acquisition tool environment, DATE. And that DATE tool or DATE environment, which falls on off of Air Force Contracting Central, will then lead you to 45 tools to date that any of our contracting officers, buyers, price analysts, data analysts, any of our policy gurus, that they can go to and look for those tools. And then we open it up and people can grade them, access them. This is a, I rate this a 5, or we have a bunch of unrated tools. And so we have 5 tools that are gold. Then we have, some medium, about 11 that are in the silver. And then we have some bronze. And then we have some that have never been rated. And people just go on and they use them, but they haven't rated them. And so that DATE environment was a way where we could help scale up. But it was also a way to show our almost 9,000 mission-focused business leaders that there were tools already out there and they didn't have to create them. And the onset of realizing that was we had 3 different locations that were working on a requirement generation tool. And they were at various levels and stages of advancement. 2 of them were homegrown, using the organic sources resources that the Air Force already had. And then one was using SIPR funding, and then it was seeking follow-on funds to try to become, a program of record. And we wanted to make sure that we could vet all the tools, that we could make sure that any tool that was being created had the authority to operate the ATO on the network, which I'm sure in your line of work, is one of the hardest things as well. Like there's all these great ideas, but if it's not secure, if it doesn't have the cyber, if it doesn't have the safety out there, then we could become vulnerable. And people, sometimes don't understand that. But I even say, like, where's the data coming from? If some of the, say, Chat GPT, you pick your GPT model. If you're putting data in, we in the Air Force and anybody in DoD would need to make sure first that if you're using your office computer, that you have the authority to operate. And then if you were ingesting data into that you make sure that you're not putting CUI data in there. So, you just need to be aware of what's going in and what's coming out. And so just really making sure that we were working with our SAF-CN folks, the cyber network folks, and that we were following the processes that were coming down from DoD, CIO. So all that was happening in 23 and 24. So we've come a long way, and we still have, still have far to go, but we're getting those policies. We're helping people with the guidance. We're getting some recipes written down. And now we have like this one-stop location where if folks want to go in, they can, know what tools already exist, and they're not expending unnecessary time on, creating something that has already been created. And just helping them along the process, keeping them excited.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I love the idea of the grading of each. Is the intent then to like use the feedback effectively to either, continue funding one versus another and or trying different things for the ones that are lower rated?
Yes. And sometimes it's not even about funding, right? Because if it's a homegrown tool, the monetary investment is really the person's time. And that means if they're investing their time in this, they're not working on something else. And so just knowing that, and then the ones, and we also share with our, our sister services. So we use, you guys have probably heard the DORA bot, the termination of responsibility, and the Army created that. So we have the script for that. And then we use GSA for Section 889. And then we're working with the Navy right now. They have a pricing tool that they told us about when we were at the OSD DPC, now DPCAP, when we were at their pricing symposium and the procure to pay symposium. The Navy had a tool, and the Army was working with them, and then the Army shared it with us. So now we're working with the Navy, and why again, go back to my earlier story, right? Why recreate the wheel if somebody already has it? So let's share the tools that we can. And that just makes us better investors of our time, and also managing the taxpayers' resources more wisely.
Yeah, I love it. No, it makes sense. I'm going to transition a little bit to maybe some advice, but I'm thinking, kind of journeyman contracting acquisition that might feel like they have a lot of good ideas in this area. Like, oh my gosh, my tool is the best, or my way of doing contracting is the best. My boss won't listen to me. My boss ignores me. What kind of advice do you have for that type of individual?
So that description, the question itself is right, goes after to why it's so important to be a change agent. What does that mean? And I have a lot of things that help me kind of talk to others about what does it mean to embrace change agency. And the two P's, two C's that I use is being positive, being patient, being courageous, and being curious. And so junior members that are getting frustrated, I remind them, we all want the same outcomes, right? We want all these tools, but we have to be patient. And so you have to understand, you have to be able to tell your elevator speech, right? So, and you have to be able to talk to your supervisor and be curious about, well, why do we do it that way? And, you know, if I'm beating my head up against the wall, how can I make it better? And that's where the courage comes in. And so I think everybody has a story to tell. And there's probably a time in almost all of our lives where that kind of mindset would have helped us get through that and to actually then resonate with our idea. So we have idea programs, but it's anybody can come straight to me, anybody, and they have. And then we've been able to, talk to folks in the middle areas or supervisory level or our senior contracting officials to get them involved. And it's never about somebody went, VFR direct. We want that. If there's a way to be creative within the bureaucracy, we encourage that. And then we direct them back to, well, here's the steps that you missed. So in the case of date, we repeatedly, so you have to be, again, persistent and patient. That patience is so important, because sometimes it doesn't matter at the senior level or the junior level. If someone isn't hearing you, it could be that you're not talking to the right person. In this case, where we would hear pockets of, we have 90 installations, about 87. So I just round up to 90, 87 installations, Air and Space Force and the Air Force. If somebody at each of those installations had the same idea, but they weren't sharing it with their supervisors and they weren't sharing it with their senior contracting officials, we don't know what they're doing inside their unit unless they share it. So that's where that awareness comes out. But even if they had a great idea and they came VFR direct to me, I understand what the process and how it could be better and how to help them. I don't want them to be frustrated. I want them to share their idea. That's where the senior contracting officials come out. And that's where it's really helpful, because then I don't have to be involved. And that's one of, I love to be involved, right? But I don't need to be involved, right? We talked about the calendar earlier. You need to prioritize your time. Occasionally get down into the muck, and that's at the point where you need to realize, like, I need to get out of the way, because if I say something, that could actually stifle creativity, because somebody would think, oh, Major General Treviño said this must be the way it is. I don't have all the best ideas. We want that free flow of information. We don't get people to be guarding. We want them to, use all their ideas, brainstorm as best they can, throw out the ones that don't work. But to truly brainstorm, you can't be grading yourself. You can't be judging others. You have to just let it flow. And so when people come BFR direct to me, which I, highly encourage, I then get with the senior contracting officials and say, hey, can you get with this team? And can you connect them with this other team? And oh, by the way, they didn't know that AFMC PKN, who created the date that we worked with, Mr. Bob Bohenick, that he's been educating people on the process because of the vetting and the authorities to operate and the process that we have. And we want to write their recipe down. And oh, by the way, did you know this existed and you could be using this instead? That's kind of where that validation and verification and the vetting process occurs. And so it still doesn't stifle creativity, but it allows it to get into a more structured, so we're not the wild west again. And that's just what we have to do. We have to be relentless about it, and you have to be positive, and you can't, if somebody goes outside of a boundary that you think exists, you can't, have nefarious intent that they thought. You have to well, they just didn't know. But the point is, now we know, and now we can work on it. So let's share that information and let's move out. It's like, forget that other stuff. It's allowing people to speak. And we've had junior members who we've now put together, and we've been able to tap into that inspiration, and they don't feel stifled anymore. Like, we had a member who was at Hanscom Air Force Base, and he had a couple ideas, and we put him on the team. So he's on the key result team. And so we just encourage that, Now, some people might be irritated. Oh, I got to have a meeting. I got to go figure this out. And I'm like, well, that's about leadership. Leadership is about meeting with your people and hearing them. And, it's an art. It's not a science. And, You do not want to stifle creativity because there will always be someone who's smarter than you. I want them in the room with me.
Absolutely. No, I love that. One of my main takeaways I jotted down was just the relentless positivity. I think that's so important. Well, hey, we're coming up against it here. I'm going to take a note from your book and give you 5 minutes back of our meeting. I wanted to say thank you so much for being here today. It was an amazing conversation. So just thank you for being here.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for everything that you do for CDAO. You guys are changing the world and giving us those tools. And I just love the way that we communicate, share across the enterprise. It's all about integration, collaboration, partnering. So thank you for your leadership.
Yeah, thank you.